Well, greetings to our COBT viewers and listeners. It's Maynard, Jeff, and Mike here with something we think is really fantastic. We're going to visit with the Wärtsilä team today. You may know Wärtsilä is an extremely large marine and overall engine manufacturer. It's a Finnish company that does business globally, almost 18,000 employees. Their power systems, installed power systems total about 80 gigawatts. So think of something the size of the Texas grid. And Wärtsilä equipment is in almost 42,000 vessels around the world. So it's a fascinating company. And we're lucky today to have Dave Millar join us. Dave's a principal in the markets, legislative, and regulatory policy area. So one thing you'll hear from Wärtsilä is they are power problem solvers, and it's fun to hear what they're thinking and advising and also talking to the authorities about, if you will. Toni Stojcevski is a general manager, project sales and development in Wärtsilä Marine. And, I think a lot of you know, we've had a lot of fun talking about shipping here and there over the years. It's a big piece of the puzzle, both in terms of commerce and in terms of the emissions. And just, global geosecurity. Shipping is incredibly important. And so, guys, let me stop there and just say, Dave and Toni, we're delighted to have you guys join us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Glad to be here.
Well, Mike, we're talking shipping today and engines today, but a strike has broken out on the East Coast. And as we're starting the filming, unfortunately, we have some missiles and things like that flying in the Mideast. But other than that, it's another quiet day here at Wärtsilä. But seriously, what would you tell us about what's happening in the markets?
Yeah, Maynard, I think you kind of stole my thunder there. But yeah, I think the market is dealing with two things. Obviously, the dock worker strike that started today is the first thing, and the second thing is Iran launching missiles against Israel. That's got crude oil prices up around $3 a barrel, around 5%. But first, the dock workers strike. I mean, I think the significance of this is that it's on both the East and Gulf Coast. We're talking about roughly 45,000 workers, and you're talking about half of all the container shipments in and out of the U.S. So it's pretty significant. Second thing, and just from a historical standpoint, this will be the first time that they've gone on strike on East Coast since 1977. The last time that they had a strike there, that lasted for about 6 weeks. And so that was pretty devastating then. It could be much more devastating today, And so what are they looking for? As far as I can see, the workers are looking for roughly a 70% wage increase over, say, 6 or 7 years. But the main point they're looking to do is limit port automation. It's pretty important for them. And so, we'll see how this plays out. I think the reason why markets are a little spooked today and why, retailers are getting hit today is, how long is this going to last? What's that mean for the U.S. economy? People are talking anywhere from $1 billion to $5 billion per day of impact. And so will that lead to short-term supply chain issues? Will that lead to short-term bump up in inflation? Who knows? The question now is, whether Biden is going to invoke the Taft-Hartley Act, which kind of gives unions it's a 90-day cooling off period. The question is, will he invoke that? If he does, that gives him time to, get through the election and also allow them time to get through the holiday season because obviously a lot of imports are coming. The question is, does he do that and anger the union base, especially this close to an election? So the market's really focused on that issue. The second issue, obviously, is today. Israel warned in the last couple of days Iran in the last couple of days was going to strike Israel. They did today with ballistic missiles. We don't know how much damage. Crude oil's up about $3 a barrel to around $71 per barrel WTI. And so, it's amazing to me that the crude oil isn't up more, but, we have a lot of different cross currents working for and against crude. Last week we saw crude oil go down because people thought that, OPEC was going to abandon production targets. Saudi was going to basically abandon what they considered was their $100 per barrel oil target. Just for a clarification, Saudi does not have an oil target, much less $100 per barrel oil target. They like to manage the market for inventories. Below 5-year averages, what they shoot for. We are below there right now. And so anything you hear about this initial, this reported target is just false. It's not true. On the other hand, what we're seeing in the markets, and we've talked about it for the last couple of weeks, is Brent structure is very, very bearish right now. That's a good thing. And that's one of the reasons why crude oil is popping a little bit today. Even with this big bearish, setup in Brent, crude's only up $3 on this. And so the issue still is the markets are still concerned with just, supply and demand dynamics for crude oil into 2025. What we're going to have tomorrow is a JMMC meeting, which is an OPEC joint ministry committee meeting tomorrow. They're going to start to talk about production quotas. They're going to talk about supply and demand. There won't be anything official coming out until the December 1st OPEC meeting, but you're going to probably hear a little about the JMMC meeting tomorrow. So that's probably going to create a little bit of volatility in crude oil prices. So that's kind of, one last thing I'd like to say on crude oil too is it is really interesting is that last week, China basically said that they were going to stimulate the economy. A lot of commodities have really moved. The Chinese stock market's up 25%, copper's up 5 or 6%, iron ore's up, but crude is not. Crude has gone sideways even with this. And so there's just a lot of bearishness built up in crude oil markets right now. And a lot of it is just because concern about demand heading into next year. One last thing we'll mention before we hand it back to you is just, we have not talked about natural gas in quite a bit of time. The reason we want to talk about it right now is natural gas is around $2.90 an M, approaching $3 an M. And I think once you approach $3 an M, you're going to start to see some of these curtailments come back, some of these shut-ins come back into the market. Now, it's not going to be immediate. You're going to have to see, at least some sustained period of above $3, M. But that's happening. The second thing I want to say is that the surplus, the natural gas surplus is around 350 BCF 4 weeks ago. It's around 215 BCF right now, so 5 or 6% above average. But we are on a pathway to get to roughly 3.9 TCF of ending storage. That's going to put us back to normal. And so now we have a fighting chance for next year, 2025 gas prices to be pretty responsive. And so we just wanted to throw that out there because we hadn't talked about it in a while. So we'll hand it back to you, Maynard.
Mike, when you talk about that excess storage, you're talking about gas in excess of what it usually is at this time of the year?
That's right. We were several months back, we were 400 to 500 BCF above the 5-year averages. Now we're only 215 BCF above 5-year averages. And hopefully by the end of the refill season, which will be November 1st, we'll be back to around 3.9 Ts. That's going to be close to normal. So it sets up, gas, if we have a nice cold winter, to really have some upside volatility.
Awesome. Jeff, anything you throw in before we jump in with Toni and Dave?
Yeah, just quickly, circling back to Mike's last comment on demand, there's a lot of discussion around the supply side of the commodities, whether it be crude oil in OPEC, whether it be the Middle East violence, whether it be these strikes. And the thing just to remember is, what creates equity value for energy stocks has tended to be much more demand oriented than supply oriented. Supply, disruptions, spikes or retractions for the market tend to be transitory, whereas demand growth tends to be viewed as more structural. And so there's a lot of noise, and I know energy stocks are up today, but ultimately, whatever provides more confidence around economic resiliency is really the answer for creating value in the stocks.
Awesome. Well, Mike, I was thinking too, as you were hitting some of these big issues, the strike and Iran in particular, it's going to make the VP debate tonight a little bit slightly more interesting. So we shall see. Well, Toni and Dave, welcome. We're really glad to have you guys. We were lucky enough early on in our Veriton experience to get to know Wärtsilä. And so you're great guys to call on to try to understand things better, particularly engines and, transportation and everything from the economics to the decarbonization issues. It's really fascinating. So welcome. Glad to have you. And Toni, maybe I could just start with you. You've been at Wärtsilä for over 20 years. You've seen quite a lot in that time. You've worked on a lot of innovation. in the marine division, what are the main things you're doing and thinking about these days?
So if you start with the current situation, today there is a meeting, the MEPC 82 in London. It's a 4-day meeting organized by the International Maritime Organization, where in this meeting there will be a discussion on the way forward to 2050. Not only discussion, but we expect some clear guidelines on the target that was announced before, reaching zero carbon by 2050 from shipping. And shipping, let's say 80% of the global trade is done by shipping. So shipping is really the engine of the world economy. Without the shipping, the economy will stop. So we cannot exist without shipping, more or less. And from Wärtsilä, our approach to this is to provide solutions in order to reach the 2050 target, zero carbon or carbon neutrality. And there are various ways to reach this path, this target. And our main focus today is to provide, again, develop these technologies and provide these technologies to the industry.
Can I ask you something, Toni? Because I was thinking about your career. I mentioned it over 20 plus years. If the focus on decarbonization is sort of a more recent, however long, whatever time frame we say that has become such a focus. If you go back 10 or 15 years ago, and you tell me, it seems like you probably would have been focused on, horsepower, fuel economy. Like, how has your experience with the marine division? You guys make so many engines for so many applications. How has the discussion changed around the company about what the customers need?
It's amazing that you asked these questions. I was reflecting on that prior to this meeting and prior to this podcast. And I was 10 years ago, we started with methanol. We had the first methanol installation. And honestly, people were kind of laughing indirectly at us, like, why are you doing these things now when nobody needs them? And it's a bit similar situation now as well. But the focus have shifted tremendously from burning the most dirty fuels, the residual heavy fuel oil that nobody wants. That was the one that was targeted for shipping and nobody cared about, to start to look into solutions to burn much more cleaner fuels like natural gas, which is, of course, now more or less a standard. In this year and last year, I think 1/3 of the vessels were prepared for dual fuel, mostly of them being natural gas driven. So the change have been very rapidly developing compared to previous years, and it's going to continue so for the future as well.
So maybe talk to us just a little bit about bunker fuel, only because I think it's not something, if you're outside of shipping, you're not as familiar with. But like, if you went back 10 or 15 years, was pretty much the entire global fleet running on bunker fuel?
Yes, and if you talk about quantities, shipping burns around 200 million tons of fuel, of let's say diesel equivalent, but it's much heavier than so. And some portion of that is marine gas oil, which is cleaner diesel with 0.1 sulfur content. But most of that fuel is heavy fuel oil, which has up to 3.5% of sulfur content. And it's really what's called the residual fuel that is left out of production of all the fuels that we use in other transportation modes.
And does it, I assume, Toni, and we should get into some of the engines that you guys make, because you've got some cool slides on that. But I assume what the ships are running on or filling up with, so to speak, depends a little bit on where the ships are and what routes they're going on and what places they're docking. what would you say about fuel and ships around the world? And because I assume if you take a ship into a European harbor, and it's just going to have certain standards that it might not have in some other places.
I think when it comes to conventional fuel, like NGO and HFO, heavy fuel oil and marine gas oil, those are available around the globe in more or less every port, because that's the standard. Then the second runner is now natural gas, growing in availability. But it's a liquefied natural gas that is the supply infrastructure for that is a bit more complex compared to diesel fuels. And then looking to the future, if you talk about methanol, ammonia, and hydrogen, then that's one of the biggest challenges to get the supply of these fuels to the end users.
So does that mean, Toni, as I say, we'll get into the engines, but because you do engines and powertrains, I mean, you really do like the guts of the ship, and you put that in as we understand it when a new ship is commissioned, right? You don't tend to replace those types of systems. That your focus at Wärtsilä would be on engines that can take a number of different fuels, because you don't want a ship that can only fill up in certain ports. You want the flexibility to take any fuel you need. But I'm in your territory now. I should let you answer that.
No, but I think you hit the nail on the head with that, because if we talk about the target of 2050, which we mentioned previously, the net zero carbon neutrality or zero carbon emissions, ships being built today in 2024 are most certainly going to be operating in 2050. And majority of the ships being built today are still being built to burn conventional fuel. So what we are focusing on and trying to develop and then deliver to our customers is a multi-fuel platform that can be adapted to these upcoming new fuels throughout the life cycle of the vessel. So we can start with what is available today if greener fuels are not available on that route. And then in the near future, we can modify that engine slightly to be able to burn methanol or ammonia or natural gas or other types of biofuel. And I think the engine flexibility it's really good. The internal combustion engine is a 160-year-old invention, maybe even more, depending on where you start. And during these 160 years, it's still proven to be one of the best energy converters out there. And especially for shipping, the internal combustion engine will be the primary choice of propulsion for many years to come, because there is no alternative that can replace the internal combustion engine. So our focus is really put on developing modular and flexible engines that can cope with future challenges and future alternative fuels.
All right, one more question, because this is so fascinating, Toni, and then let's pull up your slides. But is it fair to say, I know technology has changed a lot and it's hard to compare, but if I was buying a Wärtsilä, a large marine engine from Wärtsilä today, that could accommodate a number of fuels. So it's the latest and greatest, and it's very flexible with fuels. How much more do you think it costs to have that kind of flexibility versus, 10, 15 years ago, if I said, okay, I'm just going to burn bunker fuel, I don't care about these other options. Like adding that kind of flexibility, do you have a sense of how much that will just, I don't mean to pull you into the Wärtsilä pricing.
I understand, yeah. I would say the cost is marginal. The cost is on par with conventional technology today. You asked me how much is compared to previous. So, of course, a modern engine that is developed for diesel, it's very similar to a modern engine that is developed for dual fuel. So I would say it's not, the challenge is not on the engine. The challenge is on the fuel supply systems, because that brings a lot more complexity and cost on the fuel choice than on the actual engine choice. But what we can say is that if you buy an engine for Wärtsilä, you can rest assured that that engine will be capable to operate on future fuels.
All right. Well, I've teased the crowd a lot with your slides, so let's pull them up. You've got some really cool ones.
So I talked about this slide, but this slide is showing the net zero 2050 and the vessel lifetime. So here we can visualize vessels being built today. They will need to comply with the 2050 target. And if we continue on business as usual and nobody does anything, and we just say, hey, fuels are not available, incentives are not there, I want to play the waiting game, then we are no way near to reach that target. So all the industry must take actions that are going to be in the direction of net zero 2050. And we have taken the actions by providing the solutions that can bring that target.
Toni, could I ask you a question? In the shipping world, and they call it the net zero pressure, who feels that the most? Is it the shipping companies that are buying or leasing or operating the ships? Is it the goods manufacturers who want to make sure that when they ship stuff around the world, they're doing it with limited emissions? Is it the buyers? Like who in the community is most focused on making sure that they have limited or as few emissions as possible? So
shipping corresponds to 2% of the total global emissions. So it's a significant portion. And as such, it affects the global population. The cost for going to zero, I said shipping is 80% of the world trade, so it enables trade from point to point, and the cost will be transferred to the end user, so to say, or to the buyer eventually. The challenge is that shipping is an open market. It's a spot market where it is highly competitive. So the ship owners, without the legislations and incentives and other types of mechanisms that could cover for the increase in cost, they will not do much because they are forced to compete with the ones that are not willing to do anything.
So it's hard to get unanimous implementation of all these things.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge of IMO being the global organization, covering everyone's interest, because the interest might not always be 100% aligned. And this is where we need local regulations to come in place before we actually have a global regulation. And I think from Europe, where I am, we can for sure see that shipping is now included in the tax scheme, so emission trading scheme for emissions, and there is also regulations which is called Fuel EU Maritime, demanding use of alternative fuel and penalizing the use of conventional fuel. So regulations are there in certain local areas, but it needs to be adopted much faster. If we look into the next slide, here we can see a transition path that I described before. So starting with the conventional fuel today in 2024, if you decide on building the ship now, it takes 2 years to build the ship. So it's not something that comes directly from decisions. So I can also say that on average, we have around 1,200 to 1,500 ships being built each year. On contrary, we only have around 500 ships being scrapped. So the ships population is growing as well. So growing ships population and growing, we will also grow the total emissions, and we need these adoptions of carbon neutral or zero carbon fuels to replace the conventional fuels in order to reach the target. And it's possible with flexible engine technologies to adopt these fuels in transition. It will be biofuels to start with, and because the availability of green fuels is scarce, and eventually, when demand is growing and there are incentives in the market, the full green fuels will also be possible to replace the conventional fuels by 2050.
I was just looking at your bullets on this page about LNG is very well placed to jump in and start changing things here. And then you mentioned blue ammonia. Would you mind just spending a minute on blue ammonia?
So there are a number of colors connected to this sustainable fuels. The blue is when we have a carbon source, so production of blue ammonia originating from natural gas, where the carbon is taken out of the natural gas and is then stored permanently. So not emitted to the air, and then we have the hydrogen from the natural gas, so also hydrogen combined with nitrogen from the air, and then ammonia is made out of it. Still very effective process and very clean process if the carbon can be stored permanently in production, and then very effective, cheap fuel as well. So this might be interesting to talk about connected to the regulations in EU. We see that by 2030 or slightly further down the road, there will be a cost parity between alternative fuels, green fuels, and conventional fuels. And this cost parity comes from the mechanisms that were mentioned earlier, like ETS, which is emission trading scheme. 1 ton of conventional fuel emit 3 tons of CO2. So when you burn 1 ton of fuel, you emit 3 tons of CO2. And around the ETS is expected to be around 100 euros, or let's say $100 for US per emitted ton. So it adds around $300 or 300 euros to every ton burned fuel. And similar schemes will be for sure coming to US in the near future. And this is what the IMO is also looking into. And then on top of that, we also have the FuelEU Maritime demanding use of green fuels or penalizing if you don't use green fuels. And that is increasing as well year by year. So in Europe, we see that the incentives will be there, the technology will be there, the fuel supply, it's growing now. So should be quite optimistic to say that from 2030 and forward, we will have a much more rapid adoption of these technologies in the market.
So, Toni, are you saying there on this that of the two forces, one is fossil fuels will be getting more expensive because of this, because of a tax, basically, I guess, and at the same time, the new fuels, because of volume and other reasons, will be getting cheaper. Which of those two forces, the net of all that, do you think it means that the net is cost will go up, or is the net? When do you see? What do you see the net effect of both of those forces?
I think that the first will definitely be the tax system, because we need production of scale in order to come down in cost on fuel production. So the first fuel produced, the first 5-10 years maybe of green fuel production will not be as competitive due to the scale. But as soon as that ramps up, the cost for those fuel will go down and then take over the dynamics. If we move to the next, so this is the challenge which I said earlier. The engine, I mean, Wärtsilä is known as an engine manufacturer, and this is our roots, and this is our DNA for sure. But we can make an engine to run on all of these fuels. It's not a technological problem for us to do that. The challenge comes in fuel supply. So if we look into the fuels that we believe will be applicable for marine industry in the future, we have identified, of course, natural gas. I didn't talk so much about that because I believe that's well established today and it's growing. It's not uprising contender. Methanol, we started with it 10 years ago. It's picking up speed right now quite fast. And we also have ammonia, the first project signed recently for engine delivery. And we see that the interest in the market is quite big. So we believe that beyond 2030, the ammonia will pick up really, really strong. And this comes from the last line here, the gross tank size factor, which means that you need, for ammonia, we need roughly 4 times the space compared to 1 cubic meter of diesel fuel will then correspond to around 4 cubic meters of volume for the ammonia, because it's a gas and the energy density is lower and also needs space for storage and safety. If you look into the hydrogen, this becomes much more complex. So it takes up to 20 times more the space to have hydrogen on board vessels compared to diesel fuels. And ships are being built to transport cargo and passengers, not to transport their own fuel. So we don't see that hydrogen will be applicable, at least not for ocean-going vessels. For applications on a short sea shipping, coastal operations, that could be a choice, but it's going to be a niche market.
This is an amazing chart. This is awesome. The fuel price and then the tank size. So let me just take one of these. I'll take LNG. Okay. So you have the fuel prices ranging from a little bit less to a little bit more than low sulfur fuel. But then the tank size is almost double, if I'm reading that right.
Yes.
So the tank size being double, does that, I assume that meaningfully increases the cost of the ship? And then is that true? And if it's true, does it show up in this fuel price line?
No. So in the fuel price line, it's only energy comparison. It's not the actual cost of handling and shipbuilding. The gross tank factor, of course, it has an effect. If you're talking about merchant vessels, you might need to sacrifice cargo in order to store more fuel. So then you have less cargo capacity. But when you build ships, there are tricks which you can apply in the design phase and optimize space in a better way and minimize the cargo loss. It has an effect on weight as well, because it will have an increase in weight due to the tanks being vacuum insulated, so the tank storage weighs a bit more. So it has an effect on that. Yeah.
One of your slides at the beginning had the investment to get to net zero by 2050 is, I believe, was $5 trillion or a little bit more than $5 trillion. And I guess my question is that kind of almost equates to about $200 billion a year of spend. Can you kind of give us an idea how much the spend is per year right now? You know, just sort of magnitude of what we're looking at there, number one. And number two, the other thing I saw too is in one of your charts is there's a big, drop in emissions from 2030 to 2040. And I think during that time frame. And I think that's because of you saying that you're going to have all these synthetic fuels are going to be available, they're going to be in size, and costs are probably going to be lower. How much of that net zero forecast is based on the technology becoming available, the basically production being available and it being available at a decent price? So
the 5 trillion market comes from Clarkson's, which is a really good consultancy, and they are doing research and studies. I don't have the numbers behind this, but they believe that, or they have everything into the shipping that is required. So in this 5 trillion, it's both the fuel supply infrastructure as well as ship building and technology for ships. How much of that is invested in this decade or this couple of years, I would not dare to say honestly, but if I may guess, I would say few percentage, not more. So a ramp up, really rapid ramp up in both investments and actions is needed in order to reach the 2050 target.
Yeah, the question I was thinking about, the page that compares fuel type versus price, emissions, and tank size. I mean, it captures a lot on one page. I was thinking about how much time and effort does Wärtsilä spend in and around engine efficiency, versus engines and technologies for the newer fuels. I was just wondering, as LNG becomes more accepted and low sulfur fuel is widely available, is there a way for the existing fuels to narrow the gap just with engine efficiency, or are you kind of at the edge already of the efficiency that can be achieved?
I mean, we are not at the edge. There are still things to be done. I can say that the current engine efficiency is up to 55%, which is amazing. Coming back to the energy converter, the combustion engine is really good, highly efficient energy converter. You can do more things, but you will not get the. You cannot close the gap needed in order to come to lower emissions. You maybe can go up to 60% efficiency by highly focusing on that, but that might limit other things. When we talk about alternative fuels, our principle is that we target to keep the same efficiency even if we change fuel from conventional diesel to methanol or to ammonia. So our focus is to keep as good efficiency, the same efficiency as we have with these alternative fuels.
So one thing, Toni, and I think then we ought to jump in with Dave. So over at the right, we've got the Marine battery rack, and also assume there are things in your mind that aren't possible yet or aren't here yet, like micronuclear, etc. What are the outside the box technologies that we might be talking about in shipping 10, 15 years from now?
When nuclear have been a topic, Wärtsilä is not looking into that or investing into that. So if I comment from my own background research.
Sure.
I just had a chat with a ship designer last week about this topic, and I think again the technology is available, but when it comes to nuclear, the biggest challenge will be legislation and regulations, because ships are moving globally. They travel from Asia to US and to Middle East and to Russia and to all these countries. They're not limited by any such regulations. The other would be, I think you guys are maybe more experts on nuclear, but usually the cost of fuel is a one-time cost when it comes to shipping, because you need to to invest extremely high capex in front compared to bunkering the vessel every second week, and that's something that for an open market where ships are being sold and operating on spot rates, that might be a challenge as well.
Well, it's fascinating. Maybe Dave, if I could pull you in here, one question would be: I mentioned it. Wärtsilä is sort of in the onshore. You're in the power solutions type business. My words, but I think that's probably a good summary. So in marine, you have this very clever strategy of, hey, we can build engines, and if the fuel choice gets changed, our engine can move with that. How does that type of thinking show up when you're talking onshore and power? I mentioned you've got a huge base of, I think it's 80 gigawatts of Wärtsilä power around the world. How does that philosophy show up in your business?
Yeah, so as a bit of background, our power plant solutions are generally smaller, modular. So we're talking about 10 megawatt to 20 megawatt engine sizes that are deployed in series. So you might have 3 to 5 to 10 to 20 engines in a row that together makes up a nice size power plant. So generally 50 to 200 megawatts. I think our largest might be about up to 400 megawatts. Is fairly typical, and we call this peaking and balancing generation. I think that the difference there is that it's not just when you think of peaking generation, that's something that you turn on for just the hottest days of the year, the coldest days of the year. Otherwise, it's mostly sitting idle. Like Toni was saying, these engines are extremely efficient. They're about an 8 heat rate, which just means that it's about 8,000 BTU per kilowatt hour. They're generally about 20% more efficient than comparable gas turbine, and they're extremely flexible, right? So they're able to start and stop at any time, just like a car engine, and so they turn on, and they can really follow renewables and backstop and create that reliability for a power system. Our view in terms of a decarbonization journey is that gas engines are going to be a very important part of reliability for a long time. If I can actually just share one slide. This is what sort of we call this front-loading net zero. And so the idea is we're going to add a lot of renewables. Renewables are going to do really the bulk of the heavy lifting in terms of generating energy. And as we're doing that, that's going to take time, obviously. We're going to need to add thermal balancing technologies, and that could be engines and battery storage, right? Battery storage, of course, is generally going to be shorter duration, 2 to 4 hours these days, maybe 6 to 8 in the future. But you're still going to have winter periods, long periods where there's not much renewables, and that is going to have to be served by thermal generation. But as you add more renewables, we want to phase out inflexible plants that can't ramp up and down with the renewables. So this is going to be your legacy generation, your legacy coal, older gas steam units, stuff like that. Stuff that can't really turn on and turn off and ramp up and down very quickly. So the last piece, I guess, in a long roundabout way, your question is if you're talking about the last 80% to 100%, that last bit of the decarbonization pathway, we're going to have to convert to sustainable fuels, right? Carbon-free fuels. And at that point, you start to get towards that 80, 90, 100% clean, right? And so, we're a long way from there. But to sort of get started, and I think to have echo the same strategy, it's we're very flexible, and agnostic about where the fuels of the future are going to be. At this point, we think hydrogen blending is probably the most likely, and this would be, ideally some sort of green electrolytic hydrogen, but is could be blue hydrogen as well.
Dave, as you talk about hydrogen blending, what kind of percentages do you think we might get?
In the near term, it would be low, just because the fuel availability has to be industrialized, and generally speaking, it's not as economic to burn hydrogen as it is in terms of $1 per metric ton of carbon abated. It's more economic to go after things like replacing gray hydrogen in fertilizer, use in refining, potentially in steel making, and so those sort of harder to abate sectors. But I think the way to think about hydrogen in power generation would be as an ultra long duration storage medium. Recall we have to build renewables, use that energy to create green hydrogen through electrolyzer. You have to essentially store in that, and that's going to have to be in very large storage kinds of systems like salt caverns. Transport that hydrogen in dedicated pipelines. I guess, and the other option would be to make green hydrogen on the site where you have the engine power plant. So that each step along the way takes a bite out of the energy. You need energy to go through every step of the way, and you're probably looking at for every 100 units of energy you put in on the back end, when you get electricity back out, it might be 40, 45 if it's very efficient. So that's really, again, it's going to be a way to store energy and deploy it when there's just not enough renewables in the system.
I'll tell you, Dave, when you went through that chain, I was like, wow, that's a lot of costs and a lot of work and a lot of infrastructure. And then you had that energy stat, which is always interesting too. So
yeah, and so we don't see this as being next year or tomorrow, but so we've just announced that we have a engine that will be able to burn 100% hydrogen. It's based on our 31 SG platform, which means the 31 is the bore size of the piston, and it's if you run on natural gas, it's about 12 megawatts of output. If you're going to run it on 100% hydrogen, because hydrogen is less energy dense by volume, then it's going to be more like something around 8. And in the future, we have a 20 megawatt engine, and that we'll be able to work on the future, having that be 100% capable for hydrogen, so you can get some bigger output. But for now, you can order, you can put in an order for this 31 product. But the important thing is it's going to be able to blend from 0% to 100%, right? So in the interim, you can blend lower percentages, and you can even do that in some of our existing technology. So we actually tested at a plant in Michigan, 25% by volume in a 30-hour test, and that was a successful test. So today, even off the shelf products you can buy today, you can still blend up to 25% hydrogen.
Do you have a sense, Dave, of and Mike and Jeff, please jump back in here, but if I was making electricity with one of your bigger engines onshore, like plus or minus what the power cost of that is, or do you have a rough sense of how people should think about the cost of power generated by one of your engines?
Yeah, if you're using $2.50 natural gas, that's pretty cheap gas. I think you're talking about $35, $40 MMBTU, $40 megawatt hour electricity. So it's somewhere, we call it kind of mid to upper supply stack. It's not going to be as efficient as like a combined cycle gas turbine, which is like a 6 heat rate. It's going to be it's going to be more expensive, but it's not like a 9 or 10 heat rate peaker, right? So this is somewhere in that sort of mid to upper mid of the supply stack.
Well, guys, I think one observation, Mike, you should jump in or comment, but it's interesting that you're building a strategy, whether it's onshore or offshore or onshore or marine, where you're ready for anything. But if the world kind of pulled up short at just LNG, or, if it only goes so far, you'll be ready, right? Like you're experimenting with lots of ways to do a lot of things, but and giving customers lots of flexibility. But at the same time, you're not spending, billions, assuming we're going to have, an all hydrogen or all methanol, or if you follow me, you're just building in flexibility, which I think is quite clever. But you guys should comment. It's your strategy that I'm trying to complement.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like Toni said, this is old technology. I mean, it's a lot of R&D has gone in to make it as efficient as it is, but the basics have been around for a long time, and it really works, and it's low cost, right? And it can be deployed modularly, which is just means we're able to build it with very low risk, right? And we need the flexible dispatchability in the power system. There's no doubt about it. So it's a great investment. It's a great no regrets investment for utilities and independent power producers. And I'll let Toni talk about on the shipping side, but that flexibility is really key going forward with so much uncertainty.
I would add to reach the 2050 targets, and being IMO targets or being local regulations or incentives, I think every country in the world, every government have a target to become more greener. And in order to reach that, we need a cross-industry collaboration where every company will chip in with their own technology, what they are best to do. So we take the responsibility to provide the solutions that we believe are flexible and future safe and can be easily adapted to burn those fuels that we know of today. But we are also not limiting us. We are looking on the horizon. Are there other things that we can be doing that can enable reaching those targets? One thing that I did not mention is that not every engine, not every ship can switch fuels. And there will be ships that are going to need to do something because they are not going to have availability or don't have space or don't have the technology. And then for those ships, we are also developing carbon capture systems. So we are working on the other end of the vessel. If we cannot limit the emissions upfront in the fuel phase, we can then capture the emitted carbon at the exhaust. So there are technologies that are being developed by Wärtsilä as well on that end.
Yeah, Dave. I mean, I think, at least I do. I don't know about most people, but when I think of Wärtsilä, I think it's sort of offshore, not really onshore. So really the question I have for you guys is, I mean, if you look at stuff that's occurring from an energy standpoint over the last 4 or 5 years, nuclear 5 years ago, no one wanted to do that, right? Now it seems like everyone's jumping on the bandwagon. And I suppose probably 5 years from now that, gas has gone from we don't want to have gas to gas is a transition fuel to gas is going to be widely accepted as well. Do you think that could be the case? And maybe for your business, what are you seeing right now just from, from your order book, from the people you're talking about? I mean, how do you see things playing out over the next 3, 4, 5 years for you guys onshore?
I think the tide is already turning in terms of that realization. And the massive load growth we're undertaking and about to undertake is also going to accelerate that. And I think we're already getting large orders to support data centers, right? And even potentially just backup power, right? I mean, it's unbelievable. We thought the data center segment was really dead and not for us, but that turns out not to be the case. And so this year it's been we're getting lots and lots of orders, and the overall outlook, especially in the U.S. I mean, the U.S. is the number one market for engine power plants for Wärtsilä, and I think it's just a testament to the great need, the great industrialization we're experiencing, and the realization that we're deploying a lot of renewables and we need the flexibility to back those up and to integrate them. So I think the business outlook is very strong for us, and I think people can see that we are part of a decarbonization solution that's affordable and reliable.
Toni, I had one last question for you guys. Thank you for joining us, by the way. We really appreciate this. But I had that stat, I saw it on your homepage, which is that Wärtsilä has equipment in 40,000 approximately vessels globally. Any sense of how big the global fleet is of vessels? I guess just merchant vessels. I pulled a number or two up from the internet. I'd much rather pull up Toni to give an estimate of that kind of number.
Yeah, so in our segment, I think we are talking about the 60,000 vessels where we could deliver an equipment, or which are kind of a merchant vessel in merchant operation. If you look into the total global fleet, I think we are talking about 112,000 vessels, but there are so many low tonnage vessels in that number, which are really not applicable for the industry that we are in.
Okay, so thank you for that. And I just want to go back to what you said before, which was, we lose about 500 vessels a year, and then we add about, what was your number, 1,500?
Yeah.
So just the 1,500 minus the 500, let's say 1,000 net adds a year. Does that relate to the 60,000 or the 112?
To the 60,000. So we are adding like 1,000 vessels every year.
And one of our takeaways, I think, Mike, when we had the G captain on and talked about shipping, was that shipbuilding was slowing down a little bit because of regulatory confusion, like exactly what do I want to do? Is that your perspective as well?
It's a cyclical economy, I would say. I mean, it goes up and down, but on average, it's quite stable and growing because the population is growing, trade is growing. 80% of trade is again done by ships. I mean, so maybe the number of ships will not grow so much, but the size of the ships is growing.
Oh.
So the size and the efficiency of transporting cargo is as well growing. So if you look into the cargo curve, that one is much steeper than the number of vessels.
Well, should we ask you guys if you come back on the show in 10 years, what do you think we're talking about? Or that's an awfully hard one.
I would really like to talk about something new that we don't know about today, but I mean, fuel cells are really exciting. They are not as good energy converter as the engines today. They are not applicable in the segment. But the challenge is that previously we had the sail and the wind, and then we had the steam, and then we had the oil. These were major milestones where technology shifted kind of overnight. We don't. I cannot find something that will happen like that today. But I hope that something will come in 10 years.
It does seem like we live in an incremental world, and we wish you could dramatically change it, but it's an incremental world. But Dave, anything you'd throw in this thing? Throw something in a boiler here.
Yeah, throw it in the piston. In 10 years, that's difficult to say, but I'd like to think we're looking at what power systems that are 40, 50, 60% renewable, that we've been able to figure out how to deploy a lot of very low cost solar, a lot of low cost storage, and that we are really starting to grapple with the end game, right? Like how to actually decarbonize that last 20% cost effectively. And I think there'll be different technologies. We'll see what happens with ultra long duration storage and how that might compare with something like a hydrogen system, or if there's something else that we just we don't know. Maybe small modular nuclear does become cost effective and deployed. We'll see. But it'll be interesting, that's for sure. And we'll be there. Let's catch back up in 10 years.
It's a date. And in the interim, it's on our bucket list to come to Finland and see, is it Vasa? What's the facility there? So we want to come. Book us.
You're welcome.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, everybody.